Rob Oliphant is Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's with us here in Ottawa. Mr. Oliphant, good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
I think the new total, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, just since the war started, is about 1,100 individuals and entities that have been sanctioned by the government. How many of those, or can you quantify to any degree, how many of them hold assets in this country?
Well, it is still very hard to determine all of that, but we know that a significant number of Russian entities as well as individuals have assets in Canada. And as the Minister Joly said, we were able to freeze those and withhold them so that they're not able to use them. But the legislation that we've introduced this week with her leadership is making sure that we can now not only freeze them, but cause forfeiture so that they will give them up and we can use those assets for the victims of their atrocities. And not only in Ukraine, this is an act that will change an already rigorous sanctions regime to be used around the world. So its genesis is a number of years. Senator Radna Omitvar in the Senate worked hard on a piece of legislation. It inspired us, and the government moved very quickly by introducing legislation this week to make this happen so that we can help the victims of the atrocities of the Russian government.
Yeah, we just spoke to the German ambassador to Canada who was saying, it might spark a conversation in that country, and certainly it's something that they're looking at. Just to be clear, though, around, the different aspects of that. So you said that there's a significant amount of assets here in Canada. And would you argue that a significant amount have been seized?
Already, and we don't have the exact number. We have heard it's in the tens of millions of dollars of assets that are now subject to that freeze. And we're not in the same situation as some countries where we've seen on CBC News, pictures of yachts being confiscated by other countries. But we'll be the first country in the world, the first and certainly the G7 country. All our allies are working together on sanctions. And we've always said it's best when we work together on sanctions. So the EU, the UK, the US and Canada have been working really lockstep in the sanctions regime. Now we are the first country of those communities that are bringing forth this kind of legislation. And Minister Joly will be pitching it to all her G7, G20 allies, the EU, to say this is something we should all be doing, and then it will have real impact. We can already see the impact that the sanctions are having. Russia's starting to act out. They're lashing out at people who are engaging in the sanctions, and we see it. They've lifted. They put sanctions rather on a number of Canadians, including me. But they're also starting to act out because the sanctions are beginning to work.
So, by your estimation, there's tens of millions of dollars of assets that have been frozen by the Canadian government?
That's a ballpark number and if that I've heard.
Okay, and so then I'm just curious if, in fact, this legislation goes ahead and you are able to seize and redistribute. Does that mean, for example, through this mechanism, you anticipate there will be tens of millions of dollars that can then be directed to, for example, the victims of war in Ukraine?
Well, I can't jump to that conclusion. The law has to get passed. We have to get it. It'll be a complex regime. It'll have rights of appeal. It'll be fully compliant to the way the Canadian Charter works, but it will be effective. We are quite convinced that when the government sees this sort of atrocious behavior that Canadians are seeing, war crimes, the intentional targeting of civilians and human rights violations, that then we're able to take those assets, repurpose them, and get them out. And this is new. This is something that hasn't been done before. The World Refugee Council has been working on this for many years with Canadian leadership from Lloyd Axworthy and Alan Rock and others to try to look at the regimes in the world where dictators have essentially caused refugees. Countries are trying to support refugees and they don't have the money. And so this was the initial understanding of how this legislation could act. It is, we think it could be beneficial in the Ukraine situation as well. Canadians are looking for absolutely every way that we can help the people of Ukraine, lift them up with military assistance, and attempt to suffocate Russia so that they can no longer do this illegal invasion.
And I certainly understand the points you're making about how this might work in theory, if in fact it does go ahead. But to claim that it's going to be effective, that's why I'm asking you to quantify or to try and, I guess, convey to Canadians exactly how you know that. Because right now I'm unsure. I understand in theory how this works and that it is the first country to do that. But, it's very hard to say, OK, this will make sure that there's $10 million going, for example, to Ukrainian victims of war, or $10 billion. Like there's no, the government has not conveyed any sort of quantification of this at all. So how can you claim it's effective?
Well, and I mean, the genesis of this came, 3 years ago when I was the chair of the Immigration Committee here at the House of Commons. We heard from the World Refugee Council the demand for this sort of legislation, that it wasn't good enough to simply seize assets around the world. So it's not just about Ukraine. This is a world situation where it's approaching 100 million refugees in the world, and we want to be able to take the assets from the people who have caused the refugee problem to help refugees. And we'll see. It will play out. The legislation will have to go through the process. It'll go to committee. We'll look at it. We'll gradually understand how it's quantified. But I would say, again, sanctions work best when they're done in tandem with other countries. This legislation will work best when it's done with countries where we know Russians hold assets that are probably much larger than in Canada. So we're providing leadership. That's what Canada's doing. That's what Canada always does. We're out in front on this one, and we're going to make sure that other countries hear what we're doing, and we're inspiring them. I think that's what Minister Joly.
Sorry to interrupt. Pardon me. I just want to make sure I get this question in because we're running out of time. But when you say that, is that how you view this legislation? Just sort of signaling something or symbolizing something, and not actually, actually producing results?
It's both and. It will look at the assets that are being frozen in Canada because we have, as you said, it's close to 1,400 individuals and entities have been sanctioned since the invasion of Crimea, almost 1,000 of them since February 24th. We will continue to monitor that situation. We'll look at their assets and we'll push them on. It's a big piece of legislation.
Will you have a number?
Groundbreaking,
right.
And it's new.
Will your government have a number for Canadians at any point soon as to how many assets, for example, have been frozen?
What we do is we sanction individuals and entities, and we do that with the best understanding of what assets are in Canada. That is a moving target always, and we'll continue to do that. The bill also, we have provincial jurisdiction where assets are under and federal jurisdiction, so we'll continue to do that. It's more than signaling, though. It's real legislation, but it's also motivational. It is meant to do two motivations: motivate our allies to do similar work, but also remind Putin and Russia that their illegal activity, their targeting of individuals, their targeting of civilians, their destruction of property, their territorial integrity that they're not respecting, will not rest unpunished.
But will you at any? Yeah, I'm not trying to take away from the sort of the symbolism of that or the importance of it at all, and I do take your point on that. Will you be able to tell Canadians at any point, we have frozen X amount of assets, like our sanctions have worked in this way, here's the proof?
It's a moving target, but we will continue. The work will continue every day. We are listing more and more Russians and Russian entities. We are looking at those, obviously, who have Russian assets in Canada, and we'll continue that work. And once the legislation is passed, I think you'll see some very important results.
Okay, Mr. Oliphant, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.